stop crying. Your tears mean nothing to me now. Look at me when I'm talking to you.
I love you. I am yours.
The freezing Orc Girl asked for his fire. His reply left her in tears. The knock came after midnight, just as the wind began to scream around the hut. He almost did not open the door. No one climbed that frozen hill in weather like this unless they were desperate, dying, or dangerous. But when the second knock came, weaker than the first, he grabbed the iron poker, pulled back the latch, and froze. An orc woman stood in the storm. She was taller than him by half a head, broad-shouldered even while swaying, wrapped in a torn black cloak stiff with ice and blood. One arrow was still buried near her ribs. Another had snapped off, leaving the shaft jagged against her side. Snow clung to her dark hair and green skin, but it was the look in her eyes that stopped him. Fury, pain, and the kind of pride that refused to beg, even while death stood at her back. Then she whispered, barely able to stand, "May I warm up?" By your fire, he saw fresh tracks behind her, more than one rider, getting closer, and when he answered her, tears filled her eyes so suddenly that he knew this night was far worse than it looked. He moved before fear could stop him. The man caught her just as her knees gave out in the doorway. Even half-conscious, she was heavy with muscle and armor beneath the cloak, and it took all his strength to drag her inside and kick the door shut against the storm. The hut was barely one room, low roof, rough table, a narrow bed, stacks of chopped wood, a cracked water pot near the hearth. It was the kind of place built for surviving, not living. Cold still slipped through the walls. Smoke clung to the beams. Everything he owned could be counted in a minute, and now a wounded orc woman was lying on his floor like a fallen war banner. He knelt beside her, breathing hard. Up close, she looked even more dangerous. Her hands were scarred like a fighter's. A thick iron ring circled one arm, engraved with patterns too fine for a common traveler. Beneath the blood and frost, her cloak was made from dense dark wool, stitched with silver thread. Nothing about her belonged in a poor woodcutter's hut. When he reached for the arrow in her side, her hand shot out and locked around his wrist. Her grip was crushing. "Touch it wrong," she said through clenched teeth, "and I break your arm." He swallowed but did not pull away. "Then I'll try not to do it wrong." That seemed to catch her off guard. He heated water, tore one of his last clean shirts into strips, and cut away the frozen cloth around the wound. She watched every move with hard, suspicious eyes, as if expecting betrayal more than pain. He gave her the bed and knelt on the floor beside it, cleaning blood from green skin marked with old scars and one strange black brand near her ribs. Not a slave mark, not a soldier's mark either. Something older, something that made even her face tighten when his fingers brushed near it. She said little. He said less. Outside, the storm pounded the walls. Inside, the fire threw light across her face, and for one brief second he saw not just strength but exhaustion so deep it looked like grief. Then, as he pulled the broken arrow free, something fell from inside her cloak onto his blanket, a heavy piece of metal marked with a crest he had seen only once before, on a passing caravan's banner, a royal crest. Before he could ask, his old mule in the shed outside began to panic and kick wildly at the boards. Someone was coming up the hill. He reacted instantly. The man snatched the metal crest from the blanket and shoved it beneath the straw mattress, just as the mule slammed again against the shed wall outside. The orc woman saw the movement, saw the warning in his face, and tried to sit up too fast. Pain tore through her side. A sharp breath escaped her, but she bit down on any cry that wanted to follow. "Stay down," he said. "I do not take orders." From... A fist struck the door. Both of them went still, The man rose slowly, took the wood axe from beside the hearth, and stepped in front of the bed without thinking about it. That surprised her more than the knocking. He was not big. He was not armored. He had no chance against trained riders if they forced their way inside. But he planted his feet anyway, shoulders tight, jaw set, as if his poor little hut were a fortress and she were something under his protection. Another blow hit the door. Then a voice called through the storm. "Hoy! You alive in there? You're—" "Mule's gone mad," the man exhaled. "Old Brenner from the lower trail. No rider, no hunter, just a neighbor shouting over the weather." He answered without opening. "Storm spooked it. I've got it." A pause. Then the old man grumbled something about stubborn animals and trudged away through the snow. Only when the footsteps faded did the man lower the axe. He turned back and found the orc watching him. "Strangely, you stood in front of me," she said. He looked embarrassed by it. "The door was behind me." "That is not what I meant." He crouched by the fire instead of answering. He fed in another log, then crossed to the pot hanging over the flame. There was almost nothing left in his hut worth cooking. Half an onion, dried roots, a handful of barley, and the bone from yesterday's rabbit stew. But he made food as if scarcity were a challenge he had practiced all his life. The smell of broth slowly warmed the room. The orc woman pushed herself up against the wall of the bed, one hand pressed to her bandaged side. "You feed strangers even when they bring trouble." "I feed whoever's bleeding on my floor." The corner of her mouth moved, almost a smile, though it never fully became one. When the broth was ready, he poured it into his larger wooden bowl and brought it to her. She stared at it first, then at him. "You are giving me all of it? I can make more water taste like soup later." That earned him a longer look. In her world, gifts were weighed, debts were counted. Nothing given freely stayed free for long. Yet this human said things like that as if they cost him nothing, while she could see clearly they cost him plenty. She took the bowl. Her hands were large, scarred and steady now, despite the pain. Before drinking, she sniffed it once and frowned. "You cook like a man hiding from flavor." He blinked. "It keeps people alive. It insults the dead bone you boiled." He actually laughed, a short sound, rough from disuse. "You're alive enough to complain, then." For the first time, she drank without looking at him like an enemy. The hours that followed settled into a tense kind of quiet. He cleaned the blood from the floorboards. He checked the door bar twice. He brought in more wood from the stack beneath. The eaves. She watched everything, how he never wasted movement, how he saved every scrap of cloth, how he used the last dry herb leaves carefully, crushing them between cracked fingers before pressing them to her wound. His life was poor in all the visible ways, yet nothing in the hut felt neglected. Worn, yes, lonely, deeply. But every tool had been mended, every corner made useful. Every survival habit sharpened by patience rather than bitterness. Orcs did not live like this. Among her people, strength announced itself. Space was taken, not borrowed. Fires roared in stone halls. Meat was torn hot from spits. Even pain was made public, mastered by pride. But here, in this tiny, smoke-dark room, survival was quieter, smaller. Strangely careful. When he changed the bandage again, she did not grab his wrist this time. "Why do humans tie dried plants over their doors?" she asked suddenly, nodding toward the little bunch hanging from a roof beam. He glanced up. "My mother said bitter leaves keep fever away." "Do they?" "No," he said. "But she believed it. So I keep doing it." That answer landed somewhere, deeper than he meant it to. After a while she said, "Among my people, we hang wolf teeth at the entrance after a hard winter, to remind the house what failed to eat us." He looked at her then, properly looked, and the image made him smile despite himself. That seems more threatening. It is meant to be. The fire snapped softly between them. Later, when the wind eased and the hut sank into that thin midnight silence only snow can make, he spread his blanket near the hearth and prepared to sleep on the floor. She noticed the bed was his only real comfort in the room. "You should take it," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "You're hurt." "I've slept on rock." "I believe that." He lay down anyway, boots still on, axe within reach. For a long time neither of them spoke. Then, just as he thought she had drifted off, her low voice came from the dark. "No one followed me to Ney." "Your door by accident." His eyes opened at once, and before he could answer, they both heard it, the faint crunch of footsteps outside the hut, slow and deliberate, circling through the snow. He was already on his feet when the second step sounded outside. The man reached for the axe. The orc woman pushed herself upright despite the pain and caught the knife he had left on the stool beside the bed. Neither of them spoke. The fire cracked. The slow footsteps moved past the wall, stopped near the shutter, then scraped through the snow again toward the shed. The mule gave a frightened snort. The man took one careful step toward the door. "Wait," she whispered. He looked back. Her face had gone colder than the storm outside. "That is not a villager," she said. "A hunter tests the walls before he tests the lock." Before he could answer, a shape passed across the shutter. Just a shadow, broad and silent. Then it was gone. The two of them stayed like that for what felt like forever, listening. No knock came, no voice. At last, the steps faded downhill into the dark. The man did not lower the axe right away. "How many?" "At least 2 followed me before." "The storm broke," she said. "Maybe more by now." He turned from the door slowly. "Who are they?" She hesitated. That was answer enough to harden his face. "You expect me to hide you, feed you, bleed my last herbs into your bandages, and still know nothing." She looked away first. It was a small thing, but for someone like her it felt enormous. "I was not sure you were safer with the truth," she said quietly, "or I was not important enough to have it." The words came out sharper than he meant, but they stayed in the room between them. For a moment she looked almost angry. Then the anger thinned, and what remained underneath was worse. "You think rank makes truth easy?" she asked. "It does. Not. It only makes it dangerous." He said nothing. The silence stretched until she slowly lowered the knife into her lap. Firelight moved over the planes of her face, over the exhaustion she had tried to bury under pride. "In my world," she said, "people do not come close unless they want something. Power, favor, marriage, position, a name to stand behind. If kindness appears, it usually has a blade hidden in it." Her mouth tightened. "When I came to your door, I thought you would turn me out, or sell me before dawn." He stared at her. "I gave you my bed." "Yes." Her voice dropped. "That is why I do not understand you." That took the edge out of him more than an apology would have. He set the axe down by the hearth, though he kept it close. Then he sat on the stool, near the fire, elbows on his knees, looking more tired than angry now. "There's not much to understand. I know what cold does. I know what it means when no one comes looking for you." She studied him carefully. "No one comes looking for you either." He gave a humorless smile. "No." The word hung there, bare and honest. Maybe because the danger was already at the walls, maybe because the night had grown too thin for lies. He told her more than he meant to, about winters spent alone after his mother died, about working other men's fields, roofs, fences, and still being treated like a passing hand, about hearing laughter from village homes and walking back up the hill to a dark hut that never had anyone waiting inside. He did not speak with self-pity. That made it hit harder. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said almost too softly to hear, "Among my people, no one is ever alone. But that does not mean anyone is known." He looked up at that. For the first time, something in her own mask slipped. She did not tell him everything, but enough. She spoke of halls full of warriors and elders, of being watched since childhood, judged in every silence, measured in strength, obedience, and usefulness. She spoke of losing, the right to be weak long before she had finished being young. She did not say exactly who had betrayed her, but when she touched the black brand near her ribs, her hand trembled once. "Someone I trusted put that on me," she said. The man's jaw tightened. "To track you, to claim me," she said, "or to prove they could." The room went still again. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant bark of dogs from the lower road. He rose and barred the shutter more tightly. "Then they won't stop." "No." "Good," he said. She blinked. "Good." He looked back at her, something steadier in him now. "If they're coming anyway, I'd rather know what kind of men hunt an injured woman through winter." That was the moment she stopped looking at him like a strange human who had temporarily become useful. It was not trust yet, but it was the shape of it. Later, when the fire burned low and the darkness pressed close around the hut, he brought her warm stones wrapped in cloth for the pain in her side. She took them without mocking him. Their fingers brushed, and neither moved away too quickly. Then dawn came grey and bitter. With it came the first real sign that the hill was no longer theirs. From the lower slope rose the sound of shouting, human voices this time, alarmed, angry. The man went to the door, opened it a crack, and saw 3 villagers staring up at his hut from the trail below. One of them pointed at the tracks in the snow, and another was carrying a black-fletched arrow. The man shut the door at once. The villagers had not climbed the hill yet, but they would. He could see it in the way they stood below, pointing at the tracks, at the shed, at the drifted snow around his hut, as if trouble itself had taken shape there. The black-fletched arrow in one man's hand changed everything. What had been a hidden danger in the night was now becoming talk, suspicion, accusation. He turned back toward the bed. The orc woman was already trying to stand. "You cannot go out there like that," he said. "I cannot let them come in. You think that will calm them? It may stop them from setting fire to your roof." That hit him hard enough to silence him. She braced one hand against the wall, breathing through the pain in her side, then looked at him with a steadiness that felt different now, less guarded, more final. Outside, the voices below rose again. Someone shouted his name. Someone else shouted the word orc. "There is no more time," she said. "You deserve the truth before the hill fills with men who will twist it." He said nothing. He could feel his heart pounding, not from fear alone, but from the terrible sense that once she spoke, the small, fragile world inside the hut would be gone. She pulled back the blanket from her arm and reached for the heavy metal crest he had hidden. He stared as she held it in her palm like something she hated and could not escape. "My name is not the one I gave you," she said. "I am Varaka of the Ashen Hold, first daughter of High Chieftain Durgath, warblood of the Red Vale, oath heir to the southern clans." The hut went silent. He knew enough of border stories to understand that title. Not every detail, not every clan line, but enough. This was no wandering fighter, no exiled guard, no noble daughter traveling in secret. She was one of the most important orcs in the north, the woman who had slept in his bed, eaten his broth, and winced under his careful hands, could move clans to war by living or dying. He took a step back before he meant to. Her expression changed at once. She had expected shock, maybe anger, but that one step wounded her anyway. "You hid that from me," he said. "Yes. You let me sit here like a fool while the whole countryside could burn over your name." Her jaw tightened. "I let you live long enough to choose whether you still wish to help me." He laughed once, without humor. "Choose? Was there ever a choice? Men are already climbing my hill." Outside, a stone struck the outer wall. A rough voice shouted again for him to come out, but inside, the worst blow had already landed. He looked at her differently now, and she saw it. Not just fear, distance, the sudden, painful widening of the space between a poor human woodcutter and a woman raised among war banners, blood oaths, and command. The bed, the fire, the bandages, the nights of silence, they all seemed to belong, to a smaller truth that had just been broken open. I thought—" He stopped. "What?" she asked, and for the first time since he had known her, there was real strain in her voice. He looked away. "I thought you were someone the world had thrown aside." A faint, bitter sadness moved over her face. "It did. That is not the same." "No," she said, "it is worse." Then the rest came, harder, uglier. She told him she had not been attacked by strangers. She had been betrayed on the road while travelling under truce toward a clan. Union she did not want. A marriage, political and necessary, meant to bind rival orc houses that had spent years threatening each other with civil war. If she refused, blood would follow. If she obeyed, she would become the iron link in a peace forged without her consent. Someone inside that alliance decided a dead heir was easier to control than a living one with a will of her own. The brand near her ribs had not been put there by enemies in battle. It had been burned into her skin after the ambush by one of the men riding under her own banner, marked so she could be found, dragged back, and displayed however they wished, obedient, ruined, or dead. The man stared at her, shock giving way. "To something more painful. You came here with all that behind you," he said slowly, "and you still said nothing. I came here half frozen and hunted. I said the only thing that mattered then. May I warm up by your fire," he said, but now the memory hurt. Her eyes held his. Yes, a horn sounded outside, not a human horn. Deeper, older, orc, both. Of them turned toward the door. Varaka's face went cold. "That is my clan," she said. Then, after the smallest pause, "or the part of it that wants me returned before I can speak." The horn sounded again, closer this time, and the whole hill seemed to tense around it. Human voices were still rising from below the trail. Orc riders were approaching from the trees beyond the ridge. The hut that had held only firelight, broth, and silence now stood between two worlds, ready to turn on each other. The man reached for the axe by instinct, then stopped. It felt small now, useless against clan politics, against titles, against the kind of future standing wounded in front of him. Varaka stepped toward him anyway. She was pale beneath her green skin. One hand pressed hard to her bandaged side, but nothing in her. Posture bent, not pride this time, decision. "If I walk out there alone," she said, "they will take me back under oath and iron. They will bind me to the union I fled, silence what was done to me, and use your name to break whatever claim I still have. They will say I was weak, polluted, misled by a human sheltering above his worth." The words landed like blows because he knew they were true. Then she did something he never expected. She took off the heavy crest of her house and placed it in his rough, cracked hand. "In my clan," she said, voice low but steady, "a war heir does not offer her seal lightly. If I give it, I give claim, protection, and place beside me." He stared at the metal in his palm as if it burned. "I am offering you all three." For a moment he could not breathe. Outside, boots crushed through snow, men shouted, a horse screamed in the wind. But inside the hut, everything narrowed to her face and the impossible thing she had just said. "You do not mean that," he said at last, though part of him already knew she did. "I mean it, more than anything I have said in my life." Her eyes did not move from his. "Come with me. Stand under my fire instead of hiding by yours alone. I will give you land under my protection. No man in the border villages will take your roof or your name again. I will make a place for you in my hold if you can bear it. And if you ask for more than safety—" Her voice caught once, then steadied again. "I will choose you openly, before clan, before rival blood, before every watching mouth that thinks. Rank decides the heart." He looked at her as if she had torn open the world, a poor woodcutter, a lonely man with smoke in his rafters and patches on his sleeves. chosen by an Orc war heir. Every buried wound in him rose up at once. Fear came first. Fear of being mocked, judged, swallowed whole. Fear of standing in halls where everyone would see exactly what he was not. Fear that one day she would regret tying her future to a man whose hands knew more about splitting wood than ruling anything. And beneath it all, the oldest fear of all, the one poor men carried until it became bone deep, that kindness could be welcomed for a season, but never truly kept. "You don't know what you are asking me to survive," he said hoarsely. Varaka stepped closer. "No, I know exactly." He shook his head. "I would never belong there." "Neither do I," she said, and that broke something open between them. The truth of it hit harder than any vow. She was not offering him a perfect world. She was offering him hers, wounded, dangerous, divided, and asking him to meet her in it because she could no longer bear a life built only from duty and fear. The door shuddered under a blow from outside. He closed his fingers around her crest. Then another sound split the air, a cry from below, followed by shouting as the humans on the lower trail and the first of the Orc riders finally saw each other. The hill was about to turn bloody. The man looked at the door, then back at her. "If I take this," he said, "I lose the life I know." Varaka's face softened, fierce and raw. "If you do not, I lose more than mine." That was the moment he stopped weighing worth like a debt he could never repay. He stepped toward her, placed the crest against his chest, and said, "Then if I stand with you, it will not be as something hidden. No lies, no shame, no sending me away when your world grows hard." Her eyes shone, but she did not look away. "Never," she said. The next blow hit the door hard enough to crack the frame, and this time, when they turned to face it, they did so standing side by side. The door did not hold for long. By the time the frame split open, the hill had already become a storm of its own. Human villagers stood below with tools and hunting bows, shouting in fear. Orc riders came through the pines under dark banners, their mounts snorting white into the frozen air. For one terrible moment, it seemed certain that blood would soak the snow before the sun had fully risen. But Varaka stepped out first, wounded. Pale and still wearing a poor man's bandage beneath a borrowed blanket, she looked nothing like the untouchable war heir of border stories. Yet, when she raised her voice, both sides heard command in it. She named the traitor who had ambushed her. She named the clan faction that had tried to drag her into a forced union by fear and fire. Then, before her own riders, before the villagers, before every suspicious eye on that hill, she held out her scarred hand and declared that the human beside her had saved her life when men of rank had tried to steal it. That changed everything. Not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. One of the riders challenged her. The man with the black-fletched arrows tried to deny her words. Yet the proof was already there. The brand on her ribs, the poisoned shaft, the missing oath escort, the lies that no longer fit together under daylight. When the traitor reached for his blade in panic, it was the woodcutter who moved first, using nothing but the split-second instincts of a man who had spent his life working with sharp tools and falling timber. He struck the rider down from the saddle with the haft of his axe before the blade could reach her. That was the last moment of doubt for many watching. The traitors were taken, the forced union shattered. Varaka returned not as broken property dragged back in silence, but as a leader who had survived betrayal and named it aloud. The price was heavy. Some elders never forgave her for refusing the marriage. Some orcs looked at the human and saw weakness where she saw loyalty. Some villagers no longer greeted him with easy familiarity, as if loving her had made him something half foreign. And yet, for the first time in his life, he was no longer invisible. Months later, the hut still stood on the hill, but it was no longer lonely. Varaka had not torn it down or replaced it with a grand hall. She had repaired it with him. The roof no longer leaked. Strong cedar beams reinforced the walls. Outside the door hung winter charms of both worlds. His mother's bitter herbs, and beside them a string of wolf teeth polished clean by her hand. She came and went between the ashen hold and the borderlands, shaping a harsher peace than songs ever promised. He did not become noble, and she did not become small. They built something harder than fantasy and gentler than war, a life made of earned truth, stubborn devotion, and a fire neither of them had expected to keep. On the first deep snow of the next winter, she returned to the hut long after dark. He opened the door before she could knock. For a heartbeat they simply looked at each other, the great orc woman wrapped in fur and moonlight, the quiet human with wood smoke on his sleeves, both carrying the cost of everything they had chosen. Then Varaka, with the faintest smile, asked softly, "May I warm up by your fire?" His eyes gentled. He stepped aside and reached for her hand. "You never have to ask again." And as the door closed against the cold, her old tears were answered at last by the one thing she had crossed blood, winter, and loneliness to find, not shelter for a night, but home.